That Tuesday morning started like any other. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee, looking through emails on my phone. The September sun came through the window, warm on my shoulders. I'd been retired for 3 years by then. Mornings were mine, quiet, predictable. Then a message popped up from someone named Jennifer Hayes. "Hi, Linda. Just wanted to thank you again for the wonderful stay at your cabin. The lake views were exactly as pictured, and the fishing dock was perfect for our family photos. We'll definitely recommend you to friends." I stared at the screen. Read it again. I didn't know anyone named Jennifer Hayes, and I certainly hadn't rented out our family cabin to anyone. I set my coffee down. My hand was steady, but my mind was racing. Our cabin. The one on Lake Geneva my parents left me when they passed. The place where I'd spent every summer since I was 8 years old. Where I'd taken my own kids. Where my granddaughter Emma learned to swim. I typed back, "I think you have the wrong person. I haven't rented any cabin." Her response came immediately. "Oh, sorry for the confusion. I booked through Airbnb. The listing under Michael Morrison? Michael, my son." I felt something cold settle in my chest. I opened a new browser window and typed Airbnb Lake Geneva Cabin Michael Morrison. There it was, first result. And there were my photos. Not Michael's photos, mine. The ones from my personal albums. The shot of the sunrise over the lake that I'd taken from the dock 3 summers ago. The interior photo of the living room with my mother's quilts on the couch, the kitchen with my grandmother's dishes in the glass cabinet, even the photo of the bedroom, my bedroom, with the antique iron bed frame my father had restored. Every single photo was mine, taken by me, from my private family albums. I scrolled down. 89 reviews, 5 stars. Michael was a great host, super responsive. Cabin was even better than the pictures. We loved everything about our stay. I clicked on the calendar. Booked solid through October. Booked through Thanksgiving. The listing said, family-owned retreat on beautiful Lake Geneva. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, private dock, fishing gear included. Perfect for families. Family-owned. He got that part right. It was family-owned. By me, not him. I sat there with my phone in my hand, coffee forgotten and going cold. I thought about Michael asking me for the spare key last year. "Just want to check on things, Mom. Make sure everything's winterized." I thought about him asking if I'd send him photos of the cabin. For my screensaver, memories. Memories. He'd turned my memories into a business. I looked at the host profile. Michael Morrison, hosting since March of last year. March of last year, 18 months ago. 18 months of strangers in my parents' cabin, in my cabin, sleeping in those beds, using those dishes. Walking on that dock where my father taught Michael to fish when he was 7 years old. I pulled up my photo albums from the shelf, the real ones, the physical books my mother had kept. I found the sunrise photo. There it was in my handwriting on the back. Lake Geneva, August 2021, first morning of vacation. I looked at my phone screen. Same photo, my photo, on my son's Airbnb listing. I stared at my own photos, our family photos, on a stranger's thank you message, and my son's name at the top, host. I sat there for a long time. Then I did what I always did when something felt wrong. I walked next door to Margaret's. Margaret Chen had been my neighbor for 15 years, since Bill and I moved to this house in Naperville. She was 72, a retired librarian, and the kind of person who noticed when your newspaper sat on the driveway too long. We'd been in the same garden club since I retired. She knew me well enough to take one look at my face and say, "Come in, I'll put the kettle on." But I didn't want tea. I showed her my phone instead. Margaret read the Airbnb listing, scrolled through the reviews, looked at the photos, my photos. Then she looked at me. "Linda, how long has this been going on?" 18 months. My voice sounded strange, flat. "Since March of last year?" She sat down at her kitchen table and gestured for me to do the same. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about helping Michael through the divorce 3 years ago. $18,000 in legal fees because his ex-wife had a better attorney. I told her about the condo down payment when he moved out, $25,000 because his credit was shot after the separation. The car loan I co-signed when he couldn't get approved on his own, $15,000. The private school tuition I'd been paying for his kids, my grandchildren, $12,000 a year for 3 years running. And the emergency loans over the years that never got paid back, another $8,000, give or take. I'd given Michael over $100,000 in the past 15 years. And somewhere along the way, I'd stopped asking questions. I just said yes. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And the cabin?" My parents left it to me when Dad passed 5 years ago. I could still see him on that dock, teaching Michael to cast a line, teaching my daughter Sarah to bait a hook. It's been in our family for 40 years. They bought it when I was a kid. Every summer we'd spend July there, swimming, fishing, just being together. Did Michael ask if he could rent it out? I shook my head. He asked for a spare key last year, said he wanted to check on things, winterize the pipes. I said yes because... I stopped. Because why? Because he was my son? Because saying no felt mean. "You wanted to help," Margaret said gently. "I wanted to keep the peace." That was closer to the truth. I'd always been that way. Keep everyone happy. Don't make waves. My mother used to say I'd rather bite my tongue than start an argument. Bill used to tease me about it. "Linda, you need to learn to say no sometimes." But I hadn't. Not to Michael. Especially not after the divorce destroyed him. The divorce had been brutal. His ex-wife got primary custody. The kids only came to Michael every other weekend. It broke something in him. He'd sit in my living room on the weekends when the kids were with their mother, just staring at his phone, waiting for them to text. They rarely did. And then COVID hit. He lost his IT job, couldn't find steady work for almost a year. I'd see him at family dinners looking exhausted, defeated. I wanted to help. Of course I wanted to help. He was my son. So when he asked for the spare cabin key, I gave it to him. When he asked me to send him photos of the cabin interior for memories, I sent them. When he mentioned that cabin expenses were adding up, property taxes, insurance, utilities, I told him not to worry about it. I'd handle it. I always had. Looking back now, I could see it clearly, the pattern, but at the time, I just thought I was being a good mother. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You were being a good mother. This isn't your fault." I should have questioned it. I pulled up the Airbnb calendar on my phone again. "Look, Thanksgiving week is booked. I was planning to have everyone at the cabin this year. Sarah and her family are flying in from Seattle. Emma's been asking about it for months. She's 17 now. This might be one of the last Thanksgivings before she goes to college." Margaret looked at the calendar. Then she looked at me. "Linda, have you talked to your daughter about this?" "Not yet. Sarah's in Seattle, and she doesn't know..." I stopped. Sarah didn't know how much money I'd been giving Michael over the years. She didn't know about the loans, the down payments, the tuition. She'd have told me to stop, to set boundaries. She's going to be furious. At Michael, yes, as she should be. I thought about Sarah, my responsible daughter, the one who'd never asked me for money, who'd paid her own way through grad school, worked her way up to marketing director, bought her own house with her husband. She and Michael had never been particularly close, but this would change things between them forever. Margaret stood up and walked to her counter. She came back with a casserole dish, the blue Pyrex one that had belonged to her grandmother. Tuna casserole, probably. She always made tuna casserole when she sensed trouble. "You need to eat something, and then you need to make some calls." "Calls?" "My nephew Robert. He's a lawyer. Elder law, actually. He specializes in cases like this, family members taking advantage." She wrote a number on a Post-it note. "Call him. Today." elder law. The words made me feel suddenly old. I was 68, but I'd never thought of myself as someone who needed elder law. That was for people in nursing homes, people who couldn't manage their own affairs. But here I was. My son had taken my property, my parents' property, and used it for his own profit for a year and a half, without asking, without telling me, and I'd handed him the key. I looked around Margaret's kitchen. The same countertops she'd had for 20 years, the same curtains her mother had made, the photo of her parents on the wall by the refrigerator, steady, reliable, unchanged, everything I'd thought my life was. I stood up, casserole dish in hand. I'll call him. Margaret walked me to the door. Linda, one more thing. This isn't about being a good mother or a bad mother. This is about your son making a choice, a bad choice. Don't carry his guilt. I nodded, but as I walked back to my house, casserole getting heavy in my hands, all I could think about was that dock, that fishing rod. My father's patient voice, "Cast it out there, Michael. That's it. Wait for it." I'd been waiting. For what? I didn't know anymore. I called Robert Chen on Wednesday morning. Margaret had been right. I needed help, and I needed to understand exactly what Michael had done before I confronted him. But first, I needed to see everything, the full picture. I opened my laptop and went to Airbnb's website. I'd never used it before. Bill and I always stayed in hotels when we traveled, but I understood how it worked. You created an account, you searched for properties, you booked. I created a profile under a fake name, Jennifer Thompson, close enough to that Jennifer Hayes who'd thanked me for a stay I'd never hosted. It took 10 minutes to set up an email address and account. Then I searched Lake Geneva Cabin. Michael's listing popped up immediately, top of the results. I clicked on it. And there it was, my entire cabin laid out for strangers to browse. The sunrise photo is the main image. Then the living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms, the dock. 12 photos total. I'd taken 11 of them. The 12th was one I didn't recognize. Someone else must have taken it during a rental. A family posing on the dock, smiling, in my space. The description read, "Escape to our family's cherished Lake Geneva retreat. This 3-bedroom, 2-bath cabin offers everything you need for a relaxing getaway. Private dock with fishing gear, full kitchen, cozy living room with fireplace, and stunning lake views. Perfect for families, couples, or small groups. We've been coming here for generations. Now we want to share it with you." Generations. That part was true. My parents, me, my kids, my grandchildren. 4 generations of summers at that cabin, just not his to share. I scrolled to the pricing. $225 per night, minimum 2-night stay, cleaning fee of $75, service fees on top of that. I did the math quickly. If the cabin was booked even half the time over 18 months, and from what I could see in the reviews, it had been booked more than that, he'd made at least $40,000, maybe more. $40,000 from my property into his pocket. I clicked on the reviews, 89 of them, just as Jennifer Hayes had said, 5 stars almost across the board. Michael was such a great host, very responsive to messages, and the cabin was exactly as described. We loved our stay. The fishing was great, and the kids had a blast on the dock. Michael even left us a welcome basket with coffee and snacks. Highly recommend. Beautiful property. Michael was very hands-off. We never saw him during our stay, which was perfect for our quiet family retreat. Would definitely book again. Hands-off. Of course he was hands-off. He didn't even live in Wisconsin. He lived 20 minutes from me in Downers Grove. He probably sent someone else to clean between guests. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe guests just left it however they left it. I felt something shift in my chest. Not sadness anymore. Anger, quiet but building. I called the bank. It took 15 minutes on hold, but I finally got through to someone in customer service. I asked them to confirm who was on the property deed for the Lake Geneva address. Just me, Linda Morrison. No one else. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it real. Michael had no legal right to that cabin. None. I hung up and pulled up the county property tax records online. I'd been paying the taxes for 5 years, since my parents passed and the property transferred to me. Every payment came from my checking account. Michael wasn't on those records either, not as an owner, not as anything. I looked at the Airbnb calendar next. October was almost fully booked, November too. I scrolled to Thanksgiving week, the third week of November, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, all blocked off in gray, booked. I stopped, stared at those gray boxes. I'd been planning this Thanksgiving for months. Sarah was flying in from Seattle with her husband and both kids. Emma was so excited. She'd asked if we could make Grandma's stuffing recipe, the one my mother used to make with the chestnuts and sage. Michael's kids were supposed to come too, a whole family weekend at the cabin. But the cabin was booked by strangers who'd paid Michael $225 a night to stay in my family's home during my family's holiday. I pulled up my text thread with Sarah. Our last conversation had been about the Thanksgiving menu. She'd offered to bring pies. I'd said I'd handle the turkey. We'd talked about taking the kids out on the boat if the weather held. I couldn't tell her yet. Not like this, not over text, but I needed to tell her soon. I heard a knock on the door, Margaret checking in. I let her in and showed her the laptop screen. She read through the listing, looked at the reviews, checked the calendar. Linda, the Thanksgiving booking. I know. You were planning to have everyone there. I know. My voice was tight. Margaret sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat just yesterday morning, coffee and emails. Nothing wrong yet. What did Robert say when you called him? I'm meeting him tomorrow afternoon. He said to bring everything. The listing, the reviews, any communication with Michael about the cabin. I pulled up my text messages with Michael from the past year. There weren't many. Mostly him asking about family things, the kids, plans. Had I seen the game? That sort of thing. But there was one from last January. Hey, Mom, mind if I grab the cabin key? Want to make sure everything's winterized before it gets too cold. Pipes and all that. And my response, of course, honey. Key's in the usual spot. Thank you for checking. I'd thanked him for stealing my key so he could rent out my cabin to strangers. Margaret read over my shoulder. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, you didn't know. I should have asked questions. He's your son. You trusted him. I looked at the Airbnb calendar again, those gray boxes. Thanksgiving week. He knew I was planning to have everyone there. I told him in September. He said he'd come. Bring the kids. Did he say anything about the cabin being unavailable? No, nothing. I assumed... I stopped. What had I assumed? That everything was fine? That the cabin would be there, waiting, like it always was? I'd been stupid, trusting. Whatever you wanted to call it. Margaret squeezed my hand. Tomorrow, talk to Robert. Figure out your options. But Linda, you need to cancel those Airbnb bookings. All of them. I looked at the calendar. October, November, December. Booked solid. People who'd paid money, made plans, probably bought plane tickets. I can't just cancel them, I said. Those people didn't do anything wrong. Neither did you, but someone needs to fix this. And it's not going to be Michael. She was right. I knew she was right. But all I could think about was Emma's text from last week. Can't wait for Thanksgiving at the cabin, Mimi. Do you think we can go fishing like last time? The cabin was booked through the holidays, including the week I'd planned our family Thanksgiving. He'd stolen that too. Robert Chen's office was in downtown Naperville, on the third floor of a brick building near the Riverwalk. I'd driven past it 100 times without noticing. Elder Law Associates. The sign was understated. Professional. Margaret had told me Robert was 56, practiced elder law for 20 years, and was good people. That was enough for me. His assistant led me to his office Thursday afternoon. It was smaller than I'd expected. Warm, though. Wood desk, leather chairs, bookshelves lined with law volumes, an electric kettle on a credenza by the window, and on his desk a framed photo of what looked like a lake house. Not as big as my family's cabin, but similar. Water, dock, trees. Robert stood when I came in, tall, graying at the temples, glasses. He shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Morrison, my Aunt Margaret speaks very highly of you. Please sit." He poured tea from the kettle without asking if I wanted any. It was chamomile. The steam rose between us as I settled into the chair across from his desk. "Thank you for seeing me on short notice," I said. "Of course. Margaret explained the situation generally, but I'd like to hear it from you. Start from the beginning." So I did. The message from Jennifer Hayes, the Airbnb listing, my photos, 89 reviews over 18 months, $225 a night, the Thanksgiving booking, Michael's text about winterizing, all of it. Robert took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he looked up. "Do you have documentation?" I pulled out the folder I'd prepared. Printed screenshots of the Airbnb listing. All 12 photos, the reviews, the pricing, the calendar. The text message from Michael about the key. My bank statements from the past 2 years. Robert reviewed each page carefully. He paused at the bank statements. "These show your property tax payments, your insurance payments, your utility bills for the Lake Geneva address. Yes, I've been paying everything since my parents passed, 5 years now. And there are no deposits here from Michael? No payments for using the property, rental income sharing, anything like that?" "Nothing, not a dollar." He made a note. "And the property deed, do you have that?" I pulled it out. The deed my father had transferred to me in 2019, a year before he passed. Linda Morrison, sole owner. The property description, the parcel number, my signature at the bottom. Below it, my parents' signatures from the original purchase in 1983. Robert studied it for a long time. Then he looked at me. "Mrs. Morrison, Linda, this is very clear. You are the sole legal owner of this property. Michael has no ownership stake, no legal authority to rent it out, no right to keep any revenue generated from it." I'd known that, but hearing a lawyer say it made it real in a way that somehow hadn't been before. "What are my options?" I asked. Robert set down the deed and leaned back in his chair. "Several. First, we can send a cease and desist letter. That tells Michael to stop all rental activity immediately, return all keys, and provide a full accounting of revenue he's collected. It's formal, it's documented, and it usually gets people's attention. And if he ignores it, then we escalate. We could pursue a civil lawsuit for conversion. That's the legal term for using someone else's property without permission. You'd be entitled to all the rental revenue he collected, plus any damages to the property, plus potentially your legal fees. But litigation is expensive and slow, could take a year or more." I thought about that. A year. More Thanksgivings, more summers, more strangers in my parents' cabin while we battled in court. "There's another option," Robert continued. "Mediation. It's faster than litigation, less expensive, and it's facilitated by a neutral third party. You'd both present your positions, and the mediator helps you reach a settlement. If Michael's willing to come to the table, it can resolve things in weeks instead of months or years. What if he's not willing? Then we file the lawsuit." Robert's voice was matter of fact. "But Linda, I've done this work for a long time. Family financial abuse cases, adult children taking advantage of aging parents. It's more common than you'd think. And in my experience, most people, when faced with clear documentation and legal consequences, choose to settle." Aging parents. The phrase stung, but I was 68. My son was 43. The math was what it was. "What about the insurance?" I asked. I'd thought about this on the drive over. "I have property insurance on the cabin, but I never told them about commercial rentals. Is that a problem?" Robert's expression shifted. "Do you have your policy with you?" I pulled out the document. I'd found it in my files that morning. The property insurance policy from State Farm, renewed annually. Robert read through it quickly, then stopped at a section near the middle. "Here," he said, pointing to a paragraph. Commercial use exclusion. This policy explicitly states that any commercial rental activity must be disclosed to the insurance company and may require a separate commercial policy. If you didn't disclose the rentals, which you couldn't because you didn't know about them, and something had happened during one of those rental periods, your claim could have been denied. I stared at him. You mean if someone got hurt at the cabin while Michael was renting it out without your knowledge? Yes, the insurance company could potentially refuse to cover it, and you, as the property owner, could be held liable. He paused. That's insurance fraud, possibly on Michael's part since he was the one facilitating the rentals. At minimum, it's a significant policy violation. Evidence 4, I thought. Another layer to add to the pile. Robert made more notes. I'll need copies of everything. The Airbnb listing, your bank statements, the property deed, the insurance, policy, any communication with Michael about the cabin. I'll draft a cease and desist letter today. We'll send it certified mail so there's proof he received it. How long does he have to respond? Typically 10 days. But Linda, Robert leaned forward. You should also know that once he receives this letter, he may react defensively, angrily. People don't like being confronted with documentation of their wrongdoing. You need to prepare for that. I thought about Michael, the way he'd been after the divorce, defeated, desperate, and now this, $40,000 or more in secret income. What would he do when it all came crashing down? I understand, I said. Robert walked me through next steps. He'd send the letter. We'd wait for Michael's response. Depending on what happened, we'd either move toward mediation or begin preparing for litigation. In the meantime, I should change my locks at the cabin. Since Michael had a key, I had no way of knowing if he'd made copies. Change the locks, I repeated. I can't even get into the cabin right now. He asked for my spare key last year. I only had 2. Robert stopped writing. So Michael has your only key to the cabin? Yes? And you haven't been to the property in how long? I thought about it. Last time I'd been to the cabin was July, late July, before Michael asked for the key in August. Almost 4 months. Linda, for all you know, he could have changed the locks already. Rental properties often do that. Change locks between tenants for security. The realization hit me cold. My own cabin, my parents' legacy, and I couldn't even get inside. I'll need to get a locksmith, I said quietly. Yes, and I'd do it soon, before Michael knows the cease and desist is coming. Once he gets that letter, he may try to lock you out further, or worse, remove anything valuable from the property. I sat in the lawyer's office, looking at the deed with my name on it, my parents' cabin, and my own son locked me out. Robert's voice was gentle. I know this is difficult, but you're doing the right thing, protecting what's yours, what your parents left you. I nodded. I couldn't speak yet. The weight of it, the betrayal, the theft, the fact that I needed a lawyer to regain access to my own property, it was all sitting heavy in my chest. Robert handed me his card. Call me anytime, day or night. If Michael contacts you, if anything changes, let me know immediately. Don't talk to him about this without me, understand? Anything you say could complicate things later. I took the card. Thank you. He walked me to the door. As I left, I glanced back at the photo on his desk, the lake house. Is that yours? I asked. My parents, he said. In Michigan. Been in our family since the 50s. I get why you're fighting for yours, Linda. Some things are worth protecting. I drove home in silence. The cease and desist would go out tomorrow. Michael would receive it by Monday. And then, what? Would he apologize? Justify himself? Get angry? I thought about the Thanksgiving booking. The strangers who'd paid to stay in my cabin during my family's holiday, the revenue sitting in Michael's bank account, the 89 reviews praising a host who had no right to be hosting. I thought about my father teaching Michael to fish. Patience, Dad used to say. Wait for the right moment. I'd waited long enough. Robert sent the cease and desist on Friday afternoon. Certified mail, signature required. Michael would receive it by Monday, maybe Tuesday. I had a weekend to prepare for whatever came next, but I couldn't just wait. I needed to do something. I called Airbnb's customer service line. It took 40 minutes to get through to someone who could actually help, someone in their trust and safety department. I explained the situation, my property, my photos, listed without my permission for 18 months. I was the legal owner, I had documentation, the representative was professional, sympathetic even. She said they'd open an investigation. It could take 5 to 7 business days. If my claim was verified, they'd remove the listing and refund any guests who'd booked future stays. She gave me a case number. I wrote it down. Then I called my insurance company. That conversation was harder. I had to explain that someone had been renting out my property without my knowledge, which meant I'd been operating under false pretenses for over a year. The agent put me on hold, came back, said they'd need to review my policy in the situation. Someone from their fraud investigation team would contact me within 72 hours. Fraud investigation. The words sat heavy. I hung up and looked at my calendar. It was October 23rd. Thanksgiving was 4 weeks away. The cabin was booked through that week. Even if Airbnb removed the listing today, those guests had already paid, already made plans. My family's Thanksgiving, taken. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I grabbed my keys and drove north. The drive from Naperville to Lake Geneva took just over 3 hours. I knew the route by heart. Interstate 294 to I-94, then north through Wisconsin. The trees were turning, gold and orange and deep red. October in the Midwest, my favorite time of year. I'd made this drive 1,000 times. With Bill when he was alive, with the kids when they were young, Sarah and Michael fighting in the back seat over who got the window seat. With my parents, before they passed, when they still drove up for weekend visits, always in summer, always with coolers full of food and suitcases packed with swimsuits and fishing gear. Never alone, never like this. The cabin sat on a quiet stretch of lakefront, about 2 miles outside the main town. Gravel driveway, trees on 3 sides, water on the 4th. The leaves crunched under my tires as I pulled in. I turned off the engine and just sat there for a moment, looking at the house my parents had bought 42 years ago. It was smaller than I remembered. Isn't that always the way? The places from your childhood shrink when you see them as an adult, but it was still beautiful. Cedar siding weathered to soft gray, green shutters my mother had painted the summer before she got sick, the porch where we'd spent evenings playing cards and watching the sun set over the water. I got out of the car. The air smelled like pine and lake water and October cold. I walked around to the back of the house toward the water. The dock stretched out into the lake, old wood planks that my father had replaced section by section over the years. He used to joke that it was like the ship of Theseus. Eventually, every board would be new, but it would still be the same dock. Continuity, he'd say. That's what matters. I walked out to the end of it, stood there looking at the water. This was where my father had taught Michael to fish. Right here. Michael was 7, maybe 8, small for his age, afraid of the worms at first, but Dad was patient. It's okay to be scared, he'd said. Brave isn't not being scared. Brave is doing it anyway. And Michael had. He'd baited that hook, cast that line, caught his first fish right off this dock, a small perch, nothing impressive, but he'd been so proud. Dad took a photo. I still had it somewhere in an album at home. I wondered if Michael remembered that day, if he thought about Dad at all when he was renting out this place to strangers, if he felt anything standing on this dock, or if it was just property to him now, just money. The water was still, gray under the October sky, cold season coming. Soon the lake would freeze, and everything would go quiet and white until spring. Standing on the dock where my father taught Michael to fish, I realized something. I wasn't protecting our family by staying quiet. I was enabling theft, There's a difference between keeping the peace and losing yourself, between being generous and being used. I'd spent so many years trying to be the good mother, the helpful mother, the one who said yes and smoothed things over and made everyone else's life easier. And somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that I was allowed to say no, that I was allowed to protect what was mine, this dock, this cabin, this lake. It wasn't just property. It was 42 years of summers. It was my parents' retirement dream. It was teaching Sarah to swim right off this dock, holding her up in the water until she learned to float on her own. It was Michael's first fish. It was Emma's first boat ride, when she was 3 and afraid of the motor noise until I let her sit in my lap and steer. It was mine, and I was taking it back. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Sarah calling from Seattle. "Hey, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart." Margaret called me. Sarah's voice was tight. "She told me what Michael did, with the cabin. Is it true?" I looked out at the water. "Yes, it's true." "Mom, oh my God, for how long?" 18 months. Silence on the other end. Then, "I'm going to kill him." "Sarah?" "No, I'm serious. What the hell was he thinking? That's your cabin, Grandma and Grandpa's cabin. He can't just—" She stopped. I heard her take a breath. "Are you okay?" "I'm at the cabin right now, standing on the dock." "You drove up there?" I needed to see it, make sure it was still standing. I tried to laugh. It came out wrong. "I can't even get inside. He has the only key." "Mom, tell me you're getting a lawyer." "I already did. Margaret's nephew. He sent a cease and desist yesterday." "Good, that's good." Sarah paused. "Do you want me to fly out there? I can be there tomorrow. I'll help you deal with this." "No, honey, you have work, the kids have school. I'm okay, really." "You don't sound okay." I wasn't okay, but I was standing. That was something. I'm handling it, one step at a time. We talked for a few more minutes. Sarah made me promise to keep her updated, to call her if Michael tried anything, to not let him talk me out of pursuing this. I wouldn't. Not this time. After we hung up, I walked back to my car. I had one more thing to do. Call that locksmith Robert had recommended. Get the locks changed. Regain access to my own property. As I opened the car door, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail. I'd missed a call while I was on with Sarah. Michael. I listened to it standing in the gravel driveway, leaves falling around me in the October wind. "Mom, what the hell?" His voice was tight, angry. "I just got a letter from some lawyer saying I have to stop renting the cabin. You got a lawyer? You couldn't just call me first? Talk to me about this? Jesus, Mom, do you have any idea what you're doing? I have bills. I have obligations. You're going to ruin me financially. We need to talk about this. Call me back. Tonight." I saved the voicemail. Robert had told me to document everything. Anything Michael said could matter later. I got in my car and started the drive home. The sun was setting behind me, turning the sky pink and orange over the lake. Robert's warning echoed in my head. He may react defensively, angrily. He'd been right, but I wasn't scared. I was ready. Michael didn't call me back that weekend, but his lawyer did. Monday afternoon, Robert called. "Linda, Michael hired an attorney. They've filed a response to our cease and desist, and they're making some claims we need to discuss." I was in my garden when the call came, pulling the last of the summer weeds from the rose beds. Margaret had told me it was too late in the season, but I needed something to do with my hands, something to control. "What kind of claims?" I asked. "They're saying Michael had a verbal agreement with you to use the cabin, that he's been maintaining the property at his own expense, winterizing, repairs, upkeep, and that the rental income was meant to offset those costs." I stopped pulling weeds, sat back on my heels in the dirt. That's not true. Any of it. "I know, but we need to prove it. Do you have records of the property expenses you've been paying? Utility bills, property tax receipts, insurance payments?" "Yes, everything." "Good. Send me copies of the last 2 years. And Linda, there's something else. Michael's attorney is suggesting mediation. They want to settle this without going to court." "When?" 2 weeks from today, November 7th. It's voluntary. We don't have to agree. But I think we should. I looked at my garden, the roses I'd been deadheading, the tulip bulbs I'd planted last week for next spring, everything in its season, everything in order. Let's do it, I said. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of documents, property tax bills, insurance statements, utility invoices, 2 years' worth. Every single payment had come from my account, not Michael's, mine. I spread them out under the lamp, the same one I'd used for 35 years of grading papers. Different papers now. Same table, same lamp, same me, but not the same. Something had shifted. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Linda, this is Jessica, Michael's ex-wife. Can we talk? It's important." I stared at the message for a long moment. Jessica and I hadn't spoken since the divorce 3 years ago. She'd gotten primary custody, and things had been complicated. Michael had painted her as vindictive. I'd believed him mostly, because he was my son. I called the number. "Linda?" Jessica's voice was careful, tentative. "Hi, Jessica. I heard about the cabin, the lawyer, and everything. I'm sorry you're going through this. Michael told you? He called me last week, upset, asking if I could talk to you, convince you to drop it." She paused. I said no. I waited. "Linda, there's something you should know about why Michael needed that money." I already knew, somehow, before she said it. "Gambling?" "Yes." Jessica's voice was quiet. "It started about a year after we separated. Online poker at first, then sports betting, then everything. He'd stay up until 3 in the morning on his laptop. I found out when he asked me to co-sign a loan, said it was for a car. It wasn't. How much does he owe?" "Last I heard, about $60,000, maybe more by now. He was getting calls from collection agencies. That's part of why I fought for primary custody. I couldn't have the kids around that instability." $60,000. The cabin rental income, $40,000 or more over 18 months, wasn't just greed. It was desperation, addiction. "He's sick," Jessica continued. "I'm not excusing what he did to you, but Linda, he needs help, real help, not just you bailing him out again." "I'm not bailing him out this time." "Good." She sounded relieved. "He needs to hit bottom, actually face consequences. I tried to tell him that during the divorce. He didn't listen." We talked for a few more minutes. She gave me the name of a Gamblers Anonymous group Michael had attended twice, but quit. Said he'd told her it was stupid and he didn't have a problem. After we hung up, I sat with my documents and thought about my son, the boy who'd been afraid to bait a hook, the man who'd stolen his mother's property to feed an addiction. Both were true. Both were Michael. The next morning, Robert called again. "Michael's lawyer sent over a proposal. They're offering a payment plan. He'll pay back the rental income over 10 years, monthly installments, no interest." I did the math quickly. $42,000 over 10 years, $3,500 a year, less than $300 a month. "That's a joke," I said. "I thought so too, but I wanted to present it to you. Tell them no. If he can afford to gamble away $60,000, he can afford to pay me back faster than 10 years. I paused. "Also, I want full access to the cabin immediately and an accounting of every single rental booking, dates, amounts, everything." "I'll communicate that." 2 days later, another offer came. This one from Michael directly, a text message at 11 at night. "Mom, can we please just talk? This lawyer thing is getting out of hand. What if we split the rental money, 50-50? You get half, I keep half. It's your cabin, but I did all the work. That's fair, right?" I read it 3 times. Then I called Robert. "He's trying to negotiate around me," I said. "Don't respond to him, forward me the text. We'll address it through his attorney." I did, and I didn't respond to Michael. But that night, I lay awake thinking about it. 50-50, $21,000. It was something, more than nothing. Except it wasn't about the money. Not really. It It was about the fact that he'd taken my parents' cabin, the place where my father had taught him patience, where my mother had made us breakfast every summer morning, where 4 generations of our family had made memories, and he'd turned it into a transaction. And now he wanted me to validate that, to agree that it was fair for him to keep half of the money he'd made from my property without my permission. No. The garden club hosted a coffee morning that Friday. Margaret had organized it, called it a solidarity gathering, though she didn't say why, but I knew. Word had gotten around. Small town, smaller social circles, 6 women showed up. Margaret, of course, Diane from 2 streets over, Ruth, who taught 4th grade with me for 20 years, others I knew from church, from book club, from the library volunteer board. They didn't ask intrusive questions. They just showed up, brought coffee cake, sat in Margaret's living room and talked about the chrysanthemums and the weather and whether this winter would be as harsh as last year's. But before I left, Ruth pulled me aside. "Linda, whatever you're going through with your family, you're doing the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I nodded. My throat felt tight. "And if you need anything," she continued, "we're here." I drove home with a container of leftover coffee cake on the passenger seat and tears in my eyes I wouldn't let fall until I was in my own driveway. November 7th. The mediation date sat on my calendar like a stone. 2 weeks away, then 1 week, then 3 days. Robert called with updates. Michael's attorney was trying to delay. We held firm. Airbnb had removed the listing. Investigation complete, my claim verified. The insurance company had issued a formal warning about the policy violation, but agreed not to cancel my coverage. Everything was moving forward. But the night before the mediation, I sat at my kitchen table one more time, looking at all the documents I'd assembled. Property deed, bank statements, insurance policy, Airbnb screenshots, text messages, evidence. That's what my relationship with my son had become. Evidence for a mediation. I thought about calling him. One more time. Mother to son. Trying to understand how we'd gotten here. But I didn't. Tomorrow we'd sit across a table from each other. Lawyers present, mediator refereeing, and we'd try to find our way to some kind of resolution. I just didn't know if we'd still be a family when it was over. The conference room was on the 4th floor of a building in downtown Chicago. Neutral territory. Not Robert's office, not Michael's lawyer's office. A professional mediation space rented by the hour. I arrived early. Robert met me in the lobby, and we rode the elevator up together. Neither of us said much. There wasn't much left to say. We'd prepared for this. We had the evidence. We had the documentation. We knew what we wanted. The mediator was a woman in her 60s named Patricia Walsh. She greeted us at the conference room door. Firm handshake, kind eyes, professional navy suit. The room itself was sparse. Long table, 8 chairs, windows overlooking the city, water pitcher and glasses on a credenza. Michael and his attorney arrived 10 minutes later. I hadn't seen my son in person since September, before all of this started. 2 months. He looked thinner, tired. His attorney was younger than I'd expected. Mid-30s, expensive suit, leather briefcase. They took seats across the table from us. Michael didn't look at me. Patricia sat at the head of the table. "Good morning. Thank you all for coming. I'm Patricia Walsh, and I'll be facilitating today's mediation. Before we begin, I want to establish some ground rules. This is a voluntary process. Everything said here is confidential. The goal is to reach a mutually acceptable resolution. I'm not here to judge who's right or wrong. I'm here to help you communicate and find common ground." She looked at each of us in turn. "Linda, Robert, you requested this mediation. Would you like to present your position first?" Robert nodded. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder, everything we'd compiled over the past 3 weeks. "Mrs. Morrison is the sole legal owner of a family property in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin," Robert began. His voice was calm, measured. In August of last year, her son Michael asked to borrow a spare key to the property, claiming he wanted to perform maintenance checks. Mrs. Morrison gave him the key, trusting his stated intentions. He slid a copy of the text message across the table, the one from January. Want to make sure everything's winterized. What Mrs. Morrison did not know, Robert continued, was that Michael had listed the property on Airbnb and had been renting it out to guests for 18 months, without her permission, without her knowledge, and without sharing any of the rental revenue with her. He laid out the Airbnb screenshots, all 12 photos, 89 reviews, the pricing, the calendar. Over the course of those 18 months, Michael collected approximately $42,000 in rental income. Mrs. Morrison saw none of it. Michael's attorney leaned forward. My client maintains that he had a verbal agreement with Mrs. Morrison to use the property. He's been maintaining it. With what money? Robert interrupted. Not rudely, just factually. He slid the bank statements across the table. These are Mrs. Morrison's bank records for the past 2 years. Every property tax payment, every insurance payment, every utility bill, all paid by Mrs. Morrison. Not a single deposit from Michael. Not a dollar. He laid out the property deed next. Michael Morrison is not listed on this deed. He has no legal ownership of the property. It was inherited by Mrs. Morrison from her parents in 2019. He has no standing to rent it, no right to keep revenue from it, and no legal claim to it whatsoever. Patricia was taking notes. Michael's attorney was reading through the documents. Robert wasn't finished. Furthermore, he pulled out the insurance policy. This property is insured under a standard homeowner's policy. Commercial rental use is explicitly excluded unless disclosed to the insurance company. Michael never made that disclosure. If an accident had occurred during any of those rental periods, Mrs. Morrison's claim could have been denied, and she could have been held personally liable. This constitutes a significant policy violation. He laid out one more document, the text messages. Michael's communications with Mrs. Morrison show a pattern of deception, asking for keys under false pretenses, requesting photos for memories that were actually used for commercial listings. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Patricia turned to Michael. Would you like to respond? Michael looked at his attorney. The attorney cleared his throat. We're prepared to negotiate a settlement that reflects my client's investment in maintaining the property. What investment? I said. The words came out before I could stop them. Everyone looked at me. I'm sorry, I continued. But what investment? I have 2 years of receipts showing I paid for everything. What exactly did Michael maintain? Michael finally looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. Mom, I tried to help. I thought if I could generate some income from the cabin, it would help with expenses. You kept all the income, I said. My voice was steady, calm, but there was steel underneath. $42,000. You didn't give me a penny. You didn't ask permission. You used my photos without telling me. You took my spare key under false pretenses. And then when I found out, you tried to negotiate around my lawyer with a 50-50 split as if you had any right to that money at all. Patricia held up a hand. Let's take a breath. Michael, I'd like to hear from you directly, in your own words. Why did you rent out the cabin without your mother's permission? Michael was quiet for a long moment, then, I was desperate. His attorney touched his arm. Michael shook his head. No, she should know. Mom, I have a gambling problem. Have, I don't know. It started after the divorce. Online betting. I thought I could control it. I couldn't. He looked down at his hands. I owe about $60,000. Collection agencies were calling. I didn't know what to do. And the cabin was just sitting there empty most of the year, and I thought... He stopped. I thought I could fix everything before you found out. Pay off the debts, get clean, give you some of the money. I thought I had time. But you didn't tell me, I said. No. You didn't ask. No. You lied about winterizing, about the photos, about everything. Yes? His voice cracked. I know. I'm so sorry, Mom. I know I messed up. I didn't know what else to do. Patricia looked at me. "Linda, would you like to respond?" I looked at my son, 43 years old, sitting across a conference table from his mother with lawyers between us. I thought about the boy who'd been afraid to bait a fishhook, the teenager who'd called me crying from college because he was homesick, the young father who'd been so proud when his kids were born, and I thought about the man who'd stolen from me, who'd turned my parents' legacy into $42,000 in his pocket. Both were true. Both were my son. I took a breath. "I gave you every advantage," I said. My voice was measured, not angry, just clear. College, down payments when you needed them, legal fees for the divorce, $18,000. I co-signed loans when your credit failed. I paid private school tuition for your kids. I never once said no to you. Michael started to speak. I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. You took my parents' cabin, the place where your grandfather taught you to fish, where we spent every summer for 40 years, where 4 generations of our family made memories, and you stole from me. Not borrowed, stole. You used my photos without asking. You locked me out of my own property, and you lied to my face for 18 months. I paused. The room was silent. "I understand you have a gambling problem. I understand you were desperate. But Michael, I can't have you in my life the way I did before. That's not anger. That's self-preservation." Michael's attorney started to say something. Patricia gestured for quiet. "You will pay back every dollar you made from that cabin," I continued. "You will enter treatment for your gambling addiction. Real treatment. Not 2 meetings you quit because you think it's stupid. And you will never set foot in that cabin again without my written permission. Those terms are not negotiable." Michael was crying now, quiet, his shoulders shaking. "I'll help you get into treatment," I said. My voice was softer now. "I'll make sure you have resources, but I won't enable you anymore, and I won't pretend this didn't happen just to keep the peace." Patricia let the silence sit for a moment. Then she turned to the attorneys. "I'd like to hear from any witnesses at this point." Robert nodded. "We have 2. First, Mrs. Morrison's daughter, Sarah Morrison Klein. She's joining by video." The screen on the wall lit up. Sarah appeared, sitting in what looked like her home office in Seattle. She waved briefly at me, then addressed the room. "My name is Sarah Morrison Klein. I'm Linda Morrison's daughter and Michael's younger sister. I want to talk about what the cabin means to our family, because I think that context matters." She looked directly at the camera. At us. "That cabin is where I learned to swim. My grandfather would hold me up in the water, right off the dock, until I learned to float on my own. That cabin is where my mom taught me to make her mother's blueberry pancakes, the recipe her grandmother taught her. That cabin is where my daughter Emma, who's 17 now, caught her first fish, where she learned what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself, something that spans generations." Sarah's voice was steady. "My mother has given my brother everything: college, money, support, love, and he repaid her by turning our family's legacy into his personal ATM. I'm not here to pile on Michael. I know he's struggling, but I am here to say that my mother deserves every penny back, and that cabin needs to be protected, not for her, for Emma, for the next generation, for what our grandparents built." She looked at me through the screen. "Mom, whatever you decide here, I support you. Emma and I will be at that cabin with you next summer, making new memories, continuing the tradition. I love you." The screen went dark. I had to look away for a moment, blink hard. Robert spoke next. "For the record, Mrs. Morrison's legal position is clear. She has sole ownership. She has documentation of all expenses. She has proof of Michael's deception. In any civil litigation, she would prevail. But Mrs. Morrison prefers resolution over prolonged legal battles, which is why we're here." Patricia looked at Michael's attorney. "Do you have a counteroffer?" He consulted with Michael in hushed tones. Then, My client is prepared to repay the full $42,000 over a 3-year period. He will enter a certified gambling addiction treatment program. He will surrender all keys to the property, and he agrees to a no-contact order regarding the cabin. Any future access will require written permission from Mrs. Morrison, 72 hours in advance. Patricia looked at me. Linda? I looked at Robert. He nodded slightly. We discussed this outcome. It was fair, more than fair. And the property deed? I asked. I want the cabin formally transferred to my granddaughter Emma in a trust. Michael won't inherit it, ever. Michael's face crumpled, but his attorney nodded. Agreed. Patricia made notes. Let me summarize the proposed settlement terms. Michael Morrison will repay $42,000 in rental income to Linda Morrison over 3 years, with payment schedule to be determined. He will enter and complete a gambling addiction treatment program, with proof of enrollment provided within 30 days. He will surrender all keys to the Lake Geneva property immediately. He is barred from entering the property without written permission from Mrs. Morrison. Minimum 72 hours advance notice, and Mrs. Morrison will establish a trust for the property, naming her granddaughter as beneficiary, excluding Michael from inheritance. She looked around the table. Are these terms acceptable to both parties? Michael's attorney nodded. Robert nodded. Patricia looked at me. Linda? When the mediator asked if I accepted the terms, I looked at my son across the table. He looked smaller somehow, beaten down, but I had to protect what my parents built. Yes, I said, I accept. The settlement was finalized 2 days after mediation. Robert called to tell me the paperwork was complete. Michael had 48 hours to surrender the cabin keys. Payment schedule established, $14,000 a year for 3 years, due January 1st of each year. Treatment program enrollment confirmation due within 30 days. I drove up to the cabin that first weekend in December. Sarah flew in from Seattle to meet me there. We pulled into the gravel driveway together, her rental car following mine. The cabin looked the same as it had in October. Cedar siding, green shutters, the dock stretching out into the water, which was starting to freeze at the edges. Winter coming. Michael had left the keys in an envelope taped to the front door. No note, just keys. Sarah and I looked at each other. Then I unlocked the door, my own door, for the first time in 5 months. The cabin was clean. That surprised me. I don't know what I'd expected. Damage, maybe. Neglect. But it was clean. Furniture in place. Dishes washed. Floors swept. Michael, or someone he'd hired, had left it in good condition. Sarah pushed open every window. Lake breeze poured in, carrying pine scent and water smell and December cold. Let's air this place out, she said. New beginning. We spent the day reclaiming the space, changed the sheets on all the beds, threw the old ones in the wash, went through the kitchen cabinets, making sure my grandmother's dishes were all still there. They were. Checked my mother's quilts in the closet. Still there. Still folded the way she'd left them. Everything was there. But it felt different, like the cabin had been held hostage and was just now being returned. Sarah found me standing on the dock that afternoon, looking out at the water. She handed me a cup of coffee from the thermos we'd brought. You okay, Mom? I don't know yet, I said honestly. It's strange. It's mine again, but it doesn't quite feel like mine yet. It will, Sarah said. Give it time. We'll make new memories, better ones. We stayed until evening, cleaning and organizing and just being there. Before we left, Sarah took a photo of us on the porch, the same porch where I'd played cards with my parents, where Michael had learned to play Go Fish when he was 5, where Emma had sat last summer reading books in the sun. For the new chapter, Sarah said, showing me the picture on her phone, both of us smiling. The cabin behind us, home. The first payment arrived on January 2nd, 1 day late, but it arrived. A cashier's check for $14,000. Michael's signature required at the bank for the withdrawal. I stood in my kitchen holding the check. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. Partial closure, anyway. 2 more years of payments. 2 more years of this connection to something broken. I deposited it into a separate account Robert had helped me set up, an escrow account earmarked for Emma's future, for college, or a down payment on a house, or whatever she needed when she was old enough. The cabin revenue would go to the cabin heir. That felt right. Robert had asked me to come by his office one more time in mid-January. Final paperwork, he'd said, the trust documents. I sat across from him in the same leather chair I'd sat in 3 months ago when this all started, the same electric kettle, the same lake house photo on his desk, but everything else had changed. The trust is established, Robert said, sliding the documents across the desk. The Lake Geneva property is now held in trust for Emma Morrison Klein. She'll gain full ownership when she turns 30. Until then, your daughter Sarah is the trustee. She'll manage the property on Emma's behalf. And Michael? Explicitly excluded. Even if something happens to you, even if the trust is contested, the terms are ironclad. Michael has no claim. I signed the documents, my signature next to Sarah's, next to Emma's. 3 generations of women. The cabin would pass through us now, not through Michael, not through the son who'd broken faith with it. Robert pulled out one more item, a leather-bound journal. I got you this. Thought you might want to document the cabin's history, for Emma, so she knows what it means, what it's meant. I took the journal, ran my hand over the cover. Thank you. You're welcome. And Linda? He smiled. We're not just attorney and client anymore. I consider you a friend. If you ever need anything, not just legal advice, call me. Margaret hosted what she called a victory tea at her house in early February. She'd invited the whole garden club, 8 women crammed into her living room with teacups and her grandmother's cake plates. Margaret stood up halfway through, clinked her spoon against her cup for attention. I want to say something about Linda, about what she did. I tried to wave her off. She ignored me. Linda set boundaries with her own son. That's one of the hardest things a parent can do, especially a mother. We're taught to give and give and give, and saying no feels like betrayal. But it's not. Sometimes saying no is the most loving thing we can do, for ourselves and for the people who need to learn accountability. She raised her teacup. To Linda, for showing us what strength looks like. 8 teacups raised. 8 women I'd known for years. Not family, but something close. Chosen. Sarah and her family came for Thanksgiving. Real Thanksgiving this time. At the cabin. Emma was so excited she could barely sit still on the drive up from the airport. 17 years old, and she still bounced like a little kid when she saw the lake. They arrived Wednesday evening. We cooked together Thursday morning. Turkey, stuffing with chestnuts and sage. My mother's recipe that Sarah had learned and was now teaching Emma. We ate on the porch even though it was cold. Blankets wrapped around us, space heater nearby. The lake was frozen now. Solid white. Beautiful. Mom. Sarah said over dessert, I want Emma to understand something. She turned to her daughter. Your grandmother fought for this place. For you. When someone tried to take it, she stood up. Even though it was family. Even though it was hard. And that's what I want you to remember. You're allowed to protect what's yours. You're allowed to say no. Even to people you love. Emma looked at me. Was it scary, Mimi? Yes, I said honestly. But I did it anyway. That's brave, Emma said. I thought about my father, about what he'd told Michael all those years ago on the dock. Brave isn't not being scared. Brave is doing it anyway. Yeah, I said. I guess it is. Michael sent a letter in late December. It came to my house. Handwritten address. No return address. I opened it at my kitchen table. Mom, I'm 90 days into the program. 90 days without gambling. They say that's a milestone. It doesn't feel like one. It feels like the beginning of a very long road. I want you to know I'm doing the work. Not just the meetings, but the therapy. The hard conversations about why I do this. Why I risk everything for something that never pays off. I see now what I did. Not just the cabin, though that's part of it. I see the pattern. Asking you for money, for help, for bailouts over and over. Never facing the real problem. Using your love like a credit card I could just keep swiping. I'm sorry. I know I said that at the mediation, but I mean it more now. I understand better what I took from you. Not just the rental money, your trust, your peace, your family's legacy. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know that takes time. Maybe more time than I have. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to be better, to do better. I saw the kids last weekend, supervised visit. They asked about you. I told them you were doing well, that you were strong. I didn't tell them about the cabin, about what I did, but someday I will, when they're older, when I can face it better. Take care of yourself, Mom. Michael. I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in the drawer with all the other documents from this year. Evidence of damage, evidence of repair, evidence of trying. I didn't write back. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. But I kept the letter. 1 year later, Emma came to spend 2 weeks at the cabin. Just her and me. Sarah offered to come too, but I said no. I wanted this time. Grandmother and granddaughter, the way it used to be. The way it was always supposed to be. We arrived on a Sunday in July. The lake was warm enough for swimming again. The dock had new boards. I'd hired someone to replace the rotted sections in the spring. Same dock, better wood. Continuity. Tuesday morning, Emma found my father's old tackle box in the shed. The one he'd used when he taught Michael to fish. When he taught me to fish, 45 years ago, the rusty hinges still worked. Inside, hooks, bobbers, line, lures my father had tied by hand. Can you teach me? Emma asked. Real fishing, not just casting. I want to catch something. We went down to the dock after breakfast. The morning was clear, water like glass. I showed her how to thread the line, tie the hook, bait it with the night crawlers we'd dug up from the garden. She wasn't afraid, not like Michael had been at her age. Grandpa taught me right here, I said. He taught your Uncle Michael here too. He was patient, said fishing isn't about catching fish, it's about learning to wait, learning to pay attention, learning to know when to pull and when to let go. Emma cast her line, not perfect, but good. We sat on the dock, feet dangling, lines in the water. Do you still talk to Uncle Michael? She asked after a while. Sometimes. He calls every few weeks. Tells me about his program, his meetings. He's working, trying to get better. Are you still mad at him? I thought about that. No, not mad anymore, but things are different now. He has to earn trust back. That takes time. Mom says you set boundaries, that you showed her it's okay to protect yourself even from family. Your mom's smart. She says you're brave. I looked at my granddaughter, 18 now, starting college in the fall. The cabin would be hers someday. Not for a long time. I planned to be around for a while yet. But someday, and when it was hers, she'd know its value. Not in dollars, in generations, in mornings like this one. I was scared, I said, but I did it anyway. And that's what I want you to remember, Emma. Being scared doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes the scariest thing is also the right thing. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to protect what's yours. You're allowed to set boundaries with people you love, because love doesn't mean letting people hurt you. Her line tugged. She pulled. A small perch came up, flashing silver in the sunlight. Her first real fish. I got one. She was laughing, proud. I helped her unhook it, release it back into the water. Now you're a real fisherman, I said. Fisherwoman. Your great-grandfather would be proud. Emma hugged me right there on the dock, and I thought about all the people who'd stood on these same boards. My father, my mother, my kids when they were small. Now Emma, the line continuing. That afternoon, Sarah called. How's it going up there? Good. Emma caught her first fish this morning. I knew she would. You teaching her everything? Everything I can. After I hung up, I sat on the porch with the leather journal Robert had given me. I'd been writing in it since February. Stories about the cabin, about my parents buying it in the 80s, about summers when Sarah and Michael were small, about the years after Bill died when I'd come up here alone just to remember. And I'd written about this past year, too, about discovering the theft, about fighting for what was mine, about learning that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. The journal would go to Emma, a record, a history, so she'd know. I'd started doing something else this year, too. Robert had connected me with a senior advocacy group. I'd been helping other older adults navigate financial abuse from family members. Twice a month, I sat in on support group meetings, listened to stories that sounded like mine, offered advice, shared what I'd learned. There were more of us than I'd realized. Parents whose kids had stolen from them, grandparents whose access cards had been misused, people who felt guilty for standing up to family. I told them what Margaret had told me. Saying no is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Before Emma and I left the cabin that Sunday, I took a photo of us on the dock. Same dock where my father had stood with me, where I'd stood with my kids, where I'd just taught Emma to fish. The three of us in that photo, me, Emma, and the cabin behind us. Legacy preserved. I put it in a frame when we got home, set it on my mantle next to the old photos of my parents, of Bill, of the kids when they were small. But this new photo, this one was different. This one represented starting over, reclaiming, building something new from something that had been broken. If you're reading this, if you recognize yourself in my story, maybe you have a family member who asks for money repeatedly. Maybe someone's using your property without permission. Maybe you've been making excuses for behavior you know is wrong because you don't want to cause problems. I understand. I did that for years. But here's what I learned. Protecting what's yours isn't cruel. Setting boundaries isn't abandonment. And sometimes the people we love need to face consequences, not to punish them, to save them, and to save ourselves. It's been 18 months since I found that first message about the cabin. Michael made his second $14,000 payment on January 2nd this year. One more year to go. He's still in his program, still working on getting better. We talk on the phone every few weeks, short conversations, cordial, different. I don't know if our relationship will ever be what it was. Maybe that's okay. Maybe it needs to be different. Maybe I need to be different too. The cabin is mine again. Legally, emotionally, practically. Emma will inherit it someday through the trust Sarah manages. The tradition continues. The legacy holds. I'm 69 now, retired, widowed, living alone in Naperville. My garden is thriving. My friends are close. My daughter calls every Sunday. My granddaughter texts me photos of her dorm room. I have coffee with Margaret twice a week and dinner with the book club once a month. It's not the life I imagined at this age, but it's mine. I built it. I protected it. And that's enough. More than enough.